Hello, thank you for watching this video about hull construction standards. It's important that Australian Sailing explain these special regulations for boat owners, sailing committees, sailing managers. I think of it as one of the two most important regulations in the special regs. The reason I hold it in such high regard is that the boat has to look after the crew. If you're offshore in a Cat 1 or Cat 2 race, you've got 35 knots on the nose, 3.5 metre seas, you want to make sure the boat stays in one piece. Now, where you'll find these regulations, they're freely available on our website in the Sailing Resources one. They're a download, but what you're particularly looking for is Regulation 3.03.1. Now, it's not as complex as it might look at first pass. We can help you with this. Many of the Cat 1 and Cat 2 sailing clubs can help with this. The origin of the regulation is unfortunately through catastrophic disasters. Yacht designers, the industry learnt the hard way that we've got to make sure there are standards in place, and these eventually got introduced. The regulations are also based on subject matter expert opinion. There are think tanks out there of naval architects and engineers who are truly expert in this space, and they give advice to the sport on how we should regulate this space. But importantly, that advice is given to World Sailing, and all Australian Sailing does is pretty much copy this regulation verbatim. The reason we do that is because design of yachts and building of yachts is now an international issue. You might have a designer in Europe having a boat built in Asia, being raced in the USA and then being sold into Australia. It is not a domestic issue that Australian Sailing can regulate in isolation. Now, the special reg for hull construction standards only applies to monohulls, because there is no standard in place for multis. Only applies to monohulls. It applies to Category 1 and Category 2 racing, and the regulation is the same no matter which one of those two categories of race you're doing. Now, the way the regulation is framed is that it hinges on the age of the boat, or specifically when the boat was launched. If the primary launch date was prior to 1987, there is no standard applicable. It's based on grandfathering, because back then, in the absence of a standard, the design was just done on the judgment of the designer and the boat owner. They both collaborated to make sure the boat was fit for purpose. In 1987, other standards became available, and the special regulations were updated to recognise the ABS, which is short for the American Bureau of Shipping's guide for classing recreational yachts, or the European Community's Recreational Craft Directive, which I'll refer to as the directive, or in the later window of this stage of this window of time, closer to 2008 or 2009, ISO 12215 came into play. So if the boat was launched between 1987 and 1 July 2010, there are three options to demonstrate compliance. If the primary launch date is after 1 July 2010, ISO 12215 is the only option to demonstrate compliance. This is the decision made by World Sailing, and that way it brings consistency to how boats are designed and built. No matter which of those three options you're using to demonstrate compliance of a boat, it all hinges on the written statements from the designer and builder. Now, there is a regulation that offers, I guess, a get out of jail card for boat owners who, for legitimate reasons, do not have access to that paperwork anymore. There's a special regulation that gives discretionary power to the organising authority, and I just stress that it's discretionary. They're not compelled to accept this option, but they may accept signed statements from a naval architect or other person familiar with the standards. So there may be a naval architect or an engineer out there who is familiar with the ABS, the directive, or the ISO, and is able to sign off on the boat's design and build. Now, what do all these look like? Now, they can come in all manner of forms, but the main thing you need to do is look for the key piece of information. It doesn't matter whether it's an email or a letter or a certificate, it will need to state clearly that if it's being done under the ABS, you need a sentence in there that shows the reader that it was designed in accordance with the American Bureau of Shipping's Guide for Building and Classing Offshore Racing Yachts. Now, this example we're showing you here, for all the other words on the letter from the designer, that's the key piece of information you're looking for. Here's another example that came in the form of a letter. In many paragraphs, but key thing is you've got the signature and it states clearly. That's what you're looking for if the boat's demonstrating compliance in accordance with the ABS. Another sample of what they can look like, this is the EC Recreational Craft Directive statement. This has come in the form of a certificate that's typically buried deep within a boat's manual. Now, a boat's manual, a production cruiser racer or racer cruiser from Europe, may actually be 100 pages wide in a manual that thick. What you're looking for is this one document that states clearly that the boat's been built and meets the requirements of the Recreational Craft Directive. If the boat is newer, towards the end of that window of time leading up to 2010, or if its primary launch date is after 1 July 2010, you will have to comply with the ISO. Now, the plan review process under the ISO is all controlled by World Sailing. All the information is on the World Sailing website with regards to process. Now, contemporary designers and builders of racing yachts will be familiar with this. The way it works is that the designer will do their design and the plans get reviewed by an independent party that we refer to as a notified body. That's such as DNVGL in Europe. And a certificate is subsequently issued from World Sailing and it all gets signed by the interested parties. Now, what does this certificate look like? They're all consistent now. They'll all come on World Sailing letterhead. They're available on the website. And the important thing is that if you're on the race committee or sailing committee of the OA, or if you're the boat owner, you have to make sure that that builder's declaration is signed. We want to make sure that the builder is stating clearly that they've built the boat as per the plans given to them. Now, how do you get all these? The three different options. I'll talk through each. Now, the ABS is an older standard. You can, if the designer is still operating, you can get them from the designer, or the previous owner will have the paperwork. It's just something you're going to have to work through with the designer or the previous owner to make sure that you've got that original documentation. The EC Recreational Craft Directive, again, it's through the designer, usually a larger company from Europe, or indeed the previous owner. Rifle through the boat's manual, you'll probably find it in there already. You can contact the designer and builder of the boat to make sure that you've got the signatures that you need if they're absent. If it's the ISO, ask your designer and builder to go through the process if it's a bespoke or custom build. If they're familiar with this, they'll have to make sure that it's signed. If it's a production boat and that there's a series of boats designed and being built to that design, World Sailing will have on their website a certificate for the series. Now, you'll only need to have that documentation signed by the builder. Now, these are all on their websites. None of these are documents that Australian Sailing keeps. If you're trying to get paperwork together for an old boat, you might find that the paperwork is available at a club that has had this boat as an entry in the past, and that's something you'll have to speak with them about. A couple of little things, traps for young players, so to speak. If you modify the boat, you'll have to get new certification. Now, when I say modify the boat, we're not talking about changing a cleat. We're talking about when something is being modified on the boat that affects the boat's structural integrity, such as a new rudder fin or a new keel fin. They're good examples. Other common examples we see of modifications would be perhaps a new bow or a new stern. Speak with your designer, speak with the builder, and make sure that the paperwork is renewed. It could be a different designer and a completely different builder, and that's fine. But the main thing is that the people involved in this process sign it off. The same if there's been significant repairs. If you're in an unfortunate situation where the boat's had to undergo significant repairs, then the boat designer, the engineer involved or the builder will know whether this affects the boat's structural integrity, and it needs to be signed off again. Now, effectively, this is going through the same process again. It's not something that Australian Sailing controls. Speak with the designer and they'll be able to help. I just want to close off as I began. It's really important that the boat has the integrity to look after the crew. I hope this talk has helped you understand what the regulations are and where to find them, what each of the options can look like, and certainly how to go about getting it. Very happy if you contacted our office if you needed any help. Enjoy sailing.